Uncle Mark.
Uh-huh.
When was the last? We talked already on this show about mysticism. But frankly, I feel like just your standard workaday mysticism isn't enough.
Sure.
I feel like you got to get a gimmick. You got to have an angle.
Yeah. I totally get it. You got to get butts in seats when it comes to mysticism.
Yeah. So I think Uncle Doug, you're going to teach us all about some mystical, esoteric stuff. Maybe find something that's better, that's different than just Christian mysticism. Will you?
Boy, I got you covered.
Hooray!
And I know this show took on a unintentional theme of kind of stupid miracles and stupider mysticism, but here we are. So let's get into this.
Let's lean into it.
Boy, yeah. There's nowhere else to go but in.
Did you have a follow-up, but something more Jewy?
I am. If there are any Jewish listeners to the show, they are either going to laugh a lot or be so angry with me by the end of this. And I know we do have some, and
we have a lot of Jewish listeners. Yeah,
I'll get to that in just a second. So, well, dear uncles, part of the reason that this show exists is to point out how silly, weird, and ultimately pointless are so many of our shared religious traditions and practices. And one of the added benefits for us is that we get to spend our time delving into these wacky traditions a little more than we normally would. Sometimes it can be all fun and no harm, like, say, fortune cookies or St. Patrick. And sometimes it can be all harm and no fun, like, say, BYU conversion therapy or, dear God, the Anthill Kids.
Right.
I like that we have a low water mark.
Yes.
There's always something we can go, not that again.
Yeah.
And the low water mark was performed by Mark, which is just perfect.
Yep. That's my nickname in high school, was low water mark.
But at the end of every podcast, we hope that at least everyone's had a little laugh and maybe even learned something new. Rare is the case, thank Christ, where one of your uncles chooses a subject so broad, so complicated, and ultimately so vapid that after countless hours of research, we end up less informed and more confused than when we started.
Oh, I thought that was just what we did.
No,
that's my entire experience of this show.
Well, it's happened more than once. Such was the case when I took on the Book of Revelation, or Uncle Mark took on the Book of Ezekiel, or Uncle Dan took on and thoroughly lost to the Book of Exodus.
Yeah.
And such was the case today with the subject I have chosen. And what's funny about it is that all three of those books that we all took on have this subject kind of in common. And it's at least partly why those books are so impenetrable. Today, I want to take a swing at Kabbala.
Wow.
I freely admit that when I decided to take this on, my preconceived notions of what Kabbala is or isn't were pathetically insufficient.
Be careful, because if you swing at Kabbala and miss, you're going to hit Madonna right in the kisser. Yeah.
No, if you're going to go at Madonna, you best kill her.
That's right.
Yeah.
Kabbala is so much more and so much less than I thought it was that I found myself, like Donnie before me, completely out of my depth. So, before we embark on what promises to be an utterly confusing and sporadic 25 minutes, a couple disclaimers. I'm going to say a bunch of Hebrew words, and I am going to absolutely say them wrong. So, Hader, or any other listeners with any Hebrew skills, you're just going to have to tough this out or skip ahead.
I think you called a marker by mispronouncing her name. It's Hadar, isn't it?
Well, she's going to have to call and correct us. I did try to look up pronunciations for a while, but it just became too onerous. So forgive me. I'm doing my best.
Just say most
exactly.
of the time. You'll be fine.
I'm pretty certain that Kabbala is pronounced Kabbala and not Kabbalah, according to Google and YouTube. So there's that. The second disclaimer, Kabbala is so complicated, so nebulous, and so esoteric that there's no way that I'm going to be able to do more than scratch the surface, and listeners with any working knowledge of Kabbala are going to hear things in this segment that they believe are wrong. Here's the thing, though, and this will be demonstrated. You're right that I'm wrong, but you're also wrong that I'm wrong because I'm right about what you think is wrong, and what I'm right about, it's also totally wrong, and you're wrong about that too, all right?
So let me tell you something. I have done a lot. I've studied plenty of esoteric things. That is the theme of esotericism.
Yeah, there is no wrong answer, even though it's all wrong.
Exactly.
And they're all wrong answers. if because you're interpreting it the wrong way.
Exactly.
That's your problem. Your problem. I'm right.
So there's so many schools of thought in Kabbalah, and so many scholars have written so much contradictory literature over the centuries that anything you think about Kabbalah is right and also wrong. This can best be summed up in a common Kabbalah saying, Kabbalah begins where philosophy ends. So riddle me that. Basically, Kabbalah...
That's not a good sign. Do they know that? Do they know that that's actually a bad sign?
Kabbalah is an attempt to answer the age-old question, if a tree falls in the woods, can I still use expired coupons? So, I'll do as best as I can. I'll try to talk about what most believers in Kabbalah believe, or what most schools of Kabbalistic teaching have in common, with the caveat that I'm surely going to get tons wrong, but also not. Okay? All right.
Sold.
Kabbalah, sometimes called Jewish mysticism or the Jewish mysticism, is not as old as you think, originating as a somewhat cohesive discipline in the 13th century. So like we talked about in your segment, Uncle Dan, with the Rosicrucians, what Kabbalah is based on, at least is claimed to go back very far, but as a cohesive discipline, it isn't that old. Yeah. However, adherents believe that Kabbalah as a belief system or way of thinking predates creation.
Of course it does.
Yeah. At its most basic, Kabbalah is a set of teachings.
It was a thing before there were things.
Exactly. At its most basic, Kabbalah is a set of teachings and beliefs that endeavor to explain the relationship between the unchanging, eternal God and the mortal, finite, and flexible universe that he made and that we all live in. And spoiler alert, the Kabbalistic view of the immutable God is fucking bonkers. I think I need to mention something here for our Nevermo listeners, and I think you guys will understand and appreciate this. And I suspect this is probably true of any refugees from any Protestant sect. We three were raised in a religion whose concept of God, heaven, and eternity were anything but mystical. In fact, there is really no such thing as Mormon mysticism. Not in any way that compares to, say, Jewish or even Catholic mysticism, and certainly nothing that compares to Kabbalah. I mean, Joseph Smith...
Saying that there are no Sufi Mormons?
Basically, right. I mean, Joseph Smith dabbled in dark magic like stone looking and divining, but even that's pretty pedestrian on its face, right?
Yeah, even the stuff that you could say is straight up mysticism, Mormon mysticism, like, say, patriarchal blessings.
Right.
They don't even use them to do anything mystical. They're just so rote. There's no...
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, any of the kind of dark magic that Mormonism was born of, the church is doing everything in its power to distance itself from now.
Right.
I might say like the Book of Moses or the Book of Abraham and the Pearl of Great Price that we talked about back in episode 155 is the closest thing in all of Mormondom to mysticism. But, but in Mormonism, and I think in a lot of Protestant faiths, God is a guy. God's a man of flesh and blood, like us, and heaven is just like a nice afternoon at the park. So trying to wrap my head around the strangeness of Kabbalah was going against my programming, to say the least. I think the best way to illustrate this contrast is with Uncle Dan's breakdown of 3rd Nephi in the Book of Mormon in episodes 175, 6, and 7, and Uncle Mark's breakdown of Ezekiel in episode 86.
Don't remind me.
Dan, your struggle was against grinding boredom, like
Right.
reading the minutes from a city council meeting. And Mark, your struggle was against the insane vision of Ezekiel, like reading the fever dream of an acid freak in another language that was put through Google Translate.
Yeah.
It's, so they're just very polar opposites. So here we go. Kabbalah, which translates as reception, tradition, or correspondence, depending on who you ask, was first collated into a singular...
Can't even agree on what the name means.
I know, and that's every Hebrew word in that we're about to experience has every time you look it up, it's someone else says, oh, no, actually it means this. Sometimes they kind of mirror each other, and a lot of times they don't. So it was.
I don't even believe in Hebrew. That's not a real language.
Yeah, Hebrew believes in you. It was first collated into a singular discipline by a dude named Moses de Leon in the 13th century in Spain.
Solid name.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
He published a book in the 13th century in Spain called the Zohar, which means splendor or radiance, depending on who you ask. The Zohar is a compendium of older books and writings, along with Leon's own interpretations and teachings. It is the foundational work of Kabbalah and is required reading for any Kabbalist, no matter what school they belong to, or indeed no matter which religion. Oh, where it's worth mentioning. Although Kabbalah is primarily a Jewish tradition, because both Christianity and Islam share Jewish roots and myths, and because Judaism was so influential in Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, there are Kabbalistic offshoots in those faiths, although very minor and not worth our time today. There's Christian Kabbalistic teachings. So
that's great. I'm so happy to hear it.
It's just Christians cannot stop taking things the Jews made. They just can't.
True.
Can't stop, won't stop.
So the Zohar sets out the vast majority of teachings and doctrines that all Kabbalists believe to this day. Another rabbi, Isaac Luria, a Jerusalem-born Jew about 200 years after the publication of the Zohar, would become the most influential Kabbalist in history. He didn't add so much to the literature, but it's his interpretations that make up kind of the backbone of most Kabbalistic thought. So that's as far as I'm going to go and dig into the history, because it's just too much. From the publication of the Zohar straight through to today, pretty much everywhere Kabbala went, it was interpreted in that time and space and changed, augmented, diminished, or challenged by anyone and everyone. So with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, Kabbala rode the tide of the diaspora and found its way to every corner of the globe, and everywhere it went, it took on the history, like the flavor and the traditions of that place.
Weird.
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
Exactly.
I've never heard of that.
The only historical episode that bears mentioning is the saga of Shabbatai Zevi, which Uncle Mark talked about back in episode 79.
Oh, yeah.
A little refresher.
Such a fun story.
Yep. Zevi was a Turkish Jewish Kabbalist who in 1648 declared himself the long-awaited Messiah based on Kabbalistic teachings. He quickly gained a significant following that started to spread throughout the Ottoman Empire, which did not sit well with the Sultan, Mehmed IV, who gave Zevi an ultimatum. Convert to Islam and I'll give you an estate and a pension, or continue to claim to be the Jewish Messiah, and I will torture you to death. Before he could finish saying the ultimatum, Zevi donned a turban and swore allegiance to Allah.
Yeah.
Just ba-ding.
Yeah, and the next day his name was like Mehmet Ali Ibn or something. It was just
Exactly.
Great.
This was a pretty significant crisis for Kabbalah, because for reasons beyond my understanding, according to Kabbalah, Zevi was the right guy at the right time in the right place to be the Messiah.
Aww.
So when he converted before his yarmulke had hit the ground, it caused quite a stir in Kabbalistic circles. But don't worry, they managed to find a loophole in order to keep the whole thing going.
Shocking. Shocking, I say.
Exactly. If Jeff Goldblum taught us anything, it's that stupid beliefs, like life, finds a way. So, for our sanity, I'll just stick with the Lurianic Kabbalah.
How much do you want to bet that Jeff Goldblum is into Kabbalah?
You know, he didn't. I'm happy to say, I might be wrong, he didn't pop up anywhere that I looked, so that's something.
Hooray.
Yeah.
He'll get there.
He'll
He'll figure it out.
So I'll just stick with the Lurianic Kabbalah of the Zohar for our own edification. According to the Zohar, there are 4 principal ways of studying, and therefore interpreting and understanding, the Word and works of God, particularly the Torah. So, these 4 ways are Peshat, or direct interpretation. That is, it says what it literally says. Remez, the allegorical meaning of the words. Derash, the rabbinical interpretation of the words. And Sod, the inner esoteric meaning of the words.
Oh my God.
These modes of interpretation can play off each other, so there can be meanings within meanings of every word, letter, sentence, chapter of the book of Torah, of the book of and book in the Torah. Clear?
This shit makes me so tired.
Yeah.
We are dipping our toe. Kabbalists believe that a form of Hebrew was the literal language of creation. That is to say, God intoned Hebrew words and phrases to effectuate creation.
In the beginning, God said, and there was light.
So therefore,
it was the God of the Bible is a Hebrew God. He's got to speak something.
You've got to speak something. Exactly. So not only can meaning be found in the definition of letters and words, but in their sounds as well. The sounds of individual letters, their relationships when they are combined into words and phrases, can also be subject of those 4 modes of interpretation. Kabbalists also believe in Gematria, or the Hebrew alphanumeric code, often called Jewish numerology by dunces like me. Every letter in the Hebrew language is assigned a numerical value, So words and phrases can contain multiple numerical values depending on how the numbers are calculated or what cipher is used. So,
and that's how we get that Monster Energy drinks are from Satan.
That's exactly right. I will freely admit, when I started looking into Kabbala, I thought this was more or less the extent of it. Like, I thought Gematria was kind of what Kabbala was all about. Boy, was I wrong. Gematria predates Kabbala by thousands of years, and although it's part of Kabbala, it's just one small part, but it does add another layer of complexity. The most famous example of Gematria outside of Judaism is, of course, 666 from the Book of Revelation. If you take the Greek name Nero Kaiser, translate it into Hebrew letters, and simply add them together, you get 666. As Uncle Dan talked about in episode 180, some early manuscripts of Revelation had the number as 616, which it turns out is the numerical value of the Latin version of Nero's name, switched to Hebrew letters. But again, I don't want to oversell Gematria as a major part of Kabbala, just a part of it. So, we are just getting started, but as it stands, every letter, word, and phrase of the Torah can be interpreted at least 4 different ways. The actual sounds of the letters and words can also be interpreted such, and the numerical values of the letters, words, and phrases can be also.
Oh my God!
All these
At what point do you yell bingo? That's
Exactly.
the only thing I need to know.
And all these interpretations can be sliced and diced with each other to discover even more patterns and secrets. So there's that.
Wow.
If you Google Kabbala, one of the most common images you will see is that of the Sephirot. The Sephirot spells out the 10 divine attributes of God and how they relate to each other. The Sephirot looks like the worst possible iteration of the game Chutes and Ladders and would seem to be the most boring game imaginable, but remember, this is the religion of the dreidel. These attributes are, depending on the translation, of course, and in no particular order, understanding, crown, wisdom, justice, mercy, beauty, splendor, foundation, victory, and kingdom. Wow. God can embody one or many of these attributes at the same time, or different attributes at different times. And people can
All I have to say is that if I don't get the dog or the boot, I'm not happy.
People can also attain some or many of these attributes as well, and as they endeavor to understand and therefore grow closer to God. The arrangement of these attributes is sometimes referred to as the tree of life. If you look it up online, you can kind of get that. And sometimes overlaid with the human form, adding yet another level of complexity and mysticism. You will probably not find any book about Kabbala that does not have a version of the Sephirot on the cover. So understanding these 10 attributes, how they manifest themselves in God and each other, and how one can attain and manifest these attributes is a central goal of Kabbala. But it's important to emphasize that in Kabbala, the mystery of God may be outside our reach. This great, infinite, unknowable is called Ein Sof, and is a central tenet of Kabbala. And man, it is freaking everywhere.
So you're saying that I'm supposed to play the game that I cannot possibly win.
That I could just have written that down.
And can't even really comprehend the game itself.
Right.
Exactly. That could have just saved us all half an hour. It could have saved me about 20 hours of bending my head around this.
Don't you love it? You pick one of these topics and you just decide you got to go all in on it, and halfway through you're like, I hate this so much. I hate this so much.
So, along with the 10 attributes of God, there are levels of the human soul. There are 3 primary levels: Nefesh, which is the animal soul that is linked to instinct and bodily cravings, and which we are all given at birth. The other 2 levels of the soul must be achieved through research and obedience. They are Roch, the level of the soul linked to virtues and the ability to distinguish between good and evil, and Neshama, or higher soul, linked to intellect. This level of soul separates humans from all other life. So it kind of makes us, I don't know, special. Wait, I hear you saying, just 3 levels of the soul? That seems too simple. Fear not, dear listener, nothing in Kabbala is simple. There are further 5 levels of soul that can be attained through Kabbala. They are Chaya, linked to divine awareness; Yehida, the highest level of the soul, which allows union with God; Rach HaKodesh, the spirit of prophecy, which can only be attained within the geographical borders of Israel. No word on whether that was pre or post 1967. Neshama Yesera, the supplemental soul only attainable during Shabbat. And don't forget Neshama Kadosha, the level of the soul attained only when reading the Torah.
I was hoping you were going to get to that one. I was like, don't forget that one.
Oh, that's a good one, though, huh? Super fun.
One aspect of Kabbalah that's actually pretty interesting for us is that of the coincidentia oppositorum, or the paradoxical coincidence of opposites. This tenet posits that the truth of a concept can only be revealed in its opposite. This leads to many paradoxes, like, for example, the truth of theism can only be truly understood through understanding atheism, and vice versa. Therefore, both views contain truth, at least partial validity. This is a point where you will find rabbis actually arguing in favor of atheism. So, there's that.
Well, it is interesting that there, obviously there are a lot of atheist Jews.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. A lot. And I wonder if this has this sort of underpinning philosophy has anything to do with that sort of permission structure. I don't know.
I think it certainly does. You have to, in order to kind of explore theism, you have to explore atheism to understand it. And, I think the longer you explore atheism, the more you want to stay there. Okay. However,
and then you see what Richard Dawkins just tweeted, and you say,
yeah, maybe not.
Maybe not. Let's throw those Rosicrucians out.
This kind of rule of opposites, when applied to God, makes Kabbalists get a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know if you know this about Jews, but they are monotheistic. And it's not that watered-down monotheism of Islam and Christianity, where Muhammad and Mary, for example, are basically gods. The Jewish view of God is particularly singular. There is only one divine being, and that being alone possesses divine powers. If you were to apply,
sorry, Doug, are there Jewish saints?
No.
No.
I mean, I say that very emphatically, and I'm probably going to be proven wrong. Not in the sense that there are Christian saints or Catholic saints. There are rabbis who are revered for their teachings and writings and stuff like that. But there's not an allegory or analogy to saints in Judaism. Really
because
not even Barbara Streisand.
Islam has saints, obviously Christianity has saints, but not because that's part of what makes them sort of polytheistic.
Exactly. That veers close to polytheism. Any being that's not God that possesses any kind of godly power is basically polytheism by definition. So no. There is, like I said, there's only one divine being that possesses divine powers. So if you apply the coincidence of opposites to God, say to explain the problem of evil, one might conclude that there is another divine being, albeit a malignant one, and you can't have that. So that's inconsistent with pure monotheism. And then since attributing evil to God opens up a whole other can of worms, most Kabbalists believe that evil exists only in our mortal realm, and it derives from an imbalance in the 10 attributes of God in the Sephirot. Basically, it's our fault. So,
Of course it is.
Yeah. Like all religion.
Wait, God made us, so therefore,
yeah. Like all religious philosophies, Kabbalah is often a prisoner of its own ancient texts. None more so than the Torah, consisting of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. In Genesis 1:26 and 7, it says, quote, "And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them." Now, any literal reading of those passages should demonstrate 2 things. God was talking to somebody. Right? And if he created both man and women in his divine image, then God must possess both the masculine and feminine image. I couldn't find out how Kabbalists dismissed the former issue, but the latter issue has led Kabbalists to embrace the idea of the divine feminine. Again, there is
suckers.
There's only one God. He does not have a wife with whom he shares powers. Rather, some of the attributes in the Sephirot, such as mercy and love, are attributed to God's feminine side. So there's that.
Remember we were talking about the public universal friend, and we talked about what was the woman who started the Shakers, who was a contemporary, right? But the Shakers believe that it's a very Hedwig thing where we are perfection, or the afterlife means we become our true selves, where we are both male and female, like God is.
Yep.
which kind of blew my mind when I read that was a Shaker principle, or Shaker principle. But this sounds like a similar thing, right?
I think that probably comes from this Kabbalistic view of this divine feminine and masculine being one.
Yeah.
So one might think that this inclusion of the divine feminine, and therefore the notion that women are not intrinsically evil, might lead Judaism to some enlightened places. Well, don't hold your breath.
Right.
The main Jewish sect that Kabbala directly created is Hasidism, which is not known for its liberal views or treatment of women.
Right.
No.
Israel ben Eliezer founded Hasidism, in what is now Western Ukraine in the 18th century, based very heavily on Lurianic Kabbalah. So whatever else Kabbalah might be, it is telling that a strict adherence to its teachings led to one of the most conservative, insular, and repressive religious movements in history.
Yeah.
One of the most famous Orthodox Jewish practices, which is often ascribed to the Hasidic community, is tefillin. And I think I'm saying that correct. And that's the practice of wearing several small boxes containing verses from the Talmud, connected by leather straps that are wrapped around the arms.
I think it's tefillin or something. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it might be tefillin. I did try and look
tefillin.
at I tried to Google the pronunciation. I think it's tefillin or tefillin, but I got both. So we'll go with the consensus and call it tefillin.
I do know that the little boxes are called phylactery.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
This
passages
practice
from Exodus in it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. The practice is not unique to Hasidism, and although not part of Kabbalah, it predates both movements. In fact, in some Reformed Jewish communities, even the women can wear it. Well, look at that.
Wow.
Because of how it
ladies.
something for the girls.
Yeah.
You want to wear a box?
You want to sweat into this? Because of how it looks, which is somewhat mystical, it has been attributed by Goyim like us to Kabbalah, but it's really not. It's definitely there, but it's not part of Kabbalah. Okay, so the last aspect of Kabbalah that I'll talk about today is the names of God. God has many names in Judaism, and there are 7 that are considered so holy that if they are written, they should not be erased. These 7 names are Yahweh, Eloah, Elohim, Shaddai, Eya, and Savat. Boy, I'm sure I murdered
Seymour.
those. and Clarence. There are dozens and dozens of lesser-known and lesser-used names for God, and then there is, of course, the 72 names of God. This is a matrix of 72 different names, each with 3 letters that theoretically can be intoned in a specific order so as to be used as conjuring words or even weapons. According to Kabbalah, it was Moses' use of the 72 names of God that allowed him to part the Red Sea. So in order to have...
That's Dune, right?
It's kind of Dune-y.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of David Lynch's Dune. In order to have... And that's the thing, is there is a belief in Kabbalah that if you get the right arrangement and pronunciation, you have... It's like a killing spell. It's, what is that from Harry Potter? Somebody knows that.
I don't know that.
Rosicrucius, I think.
So in order to have power, the right number of these 72 names, arranged in the right order and intoned flawlessly must be performed. Needless to say, no one has cracked the code just yet, but not for lack of trying. So again, I am only scratching the surface of this stuff. There are so many aspects, facets, and opposing schools of thought and histories that I could not understand and we don't have time for. This stuff is so esoteric, so contradictory and complicated that I came away feeling like I'd learned a ton and also nothing at all. But
a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have you.
Exactly. I will say that there is something tempting to all this. Diving deeper and deeper into this complexity and then discovering patterns within patterns or meanings within meanings and then eventually secrets within secrets is kind of heady. Thinking that there is order to the chaos and patterns in the noise is kind of intoxicating. So I can see how people fall down this rabbit hole. I'll give you just one example. The 5th Sephirot is Gevorah, which means justice or strength. The numerical value of Gevorah in Gematria is 216. 216 is a very interesting number. It is the sum of 3 cubed plus 4 cubed plus 5 cubed, and it also happens to be 6 cubed. So the equation would read 3 cubed plus 4 cubed plus 5 cubed equals 6 cubed. This makes 216 the smallest cube number that is also the sum of 3 cubed numbers. It is also the sum of 72 plus 72 plus 72, as in, dun, 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 the 72 names of God.
See, this is why I have been calling for, and this is the editorial position of this podcast, I've long been calling for a separation of religion and math.
Yeah,
Totally.
enough.
They said they're both a nightmare on their own. Stop combining them.
Exactly. So remember, just before we let this go, the 72 names of God each have 3 letters, totaling 216 letters. There are some that believe that the correct order of all of these 216 letters is the lost, true name of God. Not only is this the plot from Darren Aronofsky's first film, Pi, which if you haven't seen, you should, but if these 216 letters are put in the correct order and intoned correctly, it would usher in the Messianic age, which is an age of justice, or Gevorah. You can see the rabbit hole, right? And Kabbala is just full of these patterns. But here's the thing. It's like QAnon. There is nothing really there. We are pattern-seeking mammals. If you do enough chanting of words or calculating of their values, you're going to find patterns, some that might even seem profound. It's just the way it is.
Well, it's like that Bible code thing. Remember when somebody found a way to take the numbers and have a computer crunch it all down, and then they find like Kennedy crossing assassination or whatever.
Exactly. You're going to find that shit. And the weaker the mind, the easier it is to be blown.
Well, I don't know. Yes, but also don't you think that there are people whose minds whose very sharp minds are obsessed with puzzle and mystery?
Yeah, totally.
For whom that's why I think rabbit hole must be like these rabbit holes must be incredibly intoxicating and fulfilling.
That's absolutely true, and I think that that's people who are really good at Sudoku and crosswords. Kind of that pattern-seeking mind would probably find a lot of fun in here.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's divine, right?
How dare you?
Which leads us inevitably to Madonna, with all its twists, with all its twists and turns and gobbledygook about levels of the soul and divine attributes, along with some Dan Brown levels of encryption. There was no fucking way that the New Age movement of the 1970s was not going to find its way to Kabbala.
Can I just quickly interject and say to listeners that it is Uncle Doug speaking in this segment. I'm just telling all my gays this, Doug. He is the one disparaging Madonna, not me. Let me keep my gay card. Okay, continue.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, guys. And I'm not done. This led to the creation of the Kabbala Center in Los Angeles in 1984, founded by Philip and Karen Berg. The Kabbala practice there focuses on the most wooey New Age elements of Kabbala, such as the metaphysics, astrology, and sex. It is catered towards celebrities and the rich, Jewish or not. The list of celebrities that have become associated with the center is a who's who list of who gives a shit. Most notably Madonna, more on her in a minute, but also Ashton Kutcher, Demi Moore, James Van Der Beek, Marla Maples, if you can believe that.
Wait,
Paris,
Trump's wife?
Yeah, Trump's ex-wife. Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, Mick Jagger, and Ariana Grande, to name but just a few. It has been Madonna's association that has generated the most publicity. Sometime in the late 90s, Madonna fell hard for Kabbala, and in 2003, she released her video for the song Die Another Day, the title track for Pierce Brosnan's final outing as James Bond. In the video, Madonna is strapped to a chair being tortured by North Koreans. On her left shoulder are tattooed the Hebrew letters Labed, Aleph, and Vav, which together are one of the 72 names of God. At the end of the video, she mysteriously disappears from the electric chair she was being held in, and the same Hebrew letters appear burned into the chair.
Whoa.
To add insult to stupidity, at one point in the video, Madonna is seductively wrapping tefillin around her arms.
Oh.
Unsurprisingly,
I don't think I've seen this video. I gotta find it.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's worth a watch because it ain't.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, the video did not find favor in the Orthodox Jewish community.
Oh, weird.
Of course, they were insulted by the blasphemous use of their religious iconography, not from the far more serious crime of recording what Rolling Stone called easily the weirdest Bond theme ever recorded, or for the fact that every auto-tuner on Earth was shipped in for the record. So whatever Kabbala is or is not, I guess the basic philosophical question is, if two paths diverge in the woods, and one leads to Hasidic Judaism and the other leads to Madonna, maybe turn around and go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a bad woods. You found the wrong woods.
You
Exactly.
were in the wrong woods.
So
Wow.
that's my whack at it, man. I gave it my all. I'll tell you what.
35 minutes later, and I feel like I know less about Kabbala than I did 35 minutes ago.
Imagine how I feel.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good job on that one, Doug. We cleared it all
Thanks.
up for us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we learn and unlearn any more, let's move on.
Moving on.